angles and plates, okay? Which you've got plates, angles, beams and columns. So you've got the lot that I'm going to go over. However, there's a little bit of a twist. I'm going to make you calculate the angle, so that's where a lot of the weighting of the marks will be in that part of the schedule. But anyway, that'll help you with your assignment big time. This week's notes, there's two things that I'm going to go over. If it's something to do with the assignment, I will stop and I'll say that will be useful for the assignment. If it's to do with the test, I will stop and I'll say there are some questions on this. And the test so when I say that, as you know from the first test, they're in my question bank. So one of you might get one from there, you might miss out, but you might get one for the next thing that I talk about. All right? So at least I'm giving you some areas to look at when you go. The tests are only worth 10% each, so it's not the end of the world if you fail them, but it gives you an opportunity to catch up some marks if you're struggling a bit with the assignment. So without further ado, we'll jump to week 9. And we'll make the notes available. And we'll do that exercise after the notes. I'm well aware that Lucy's going to stick her head in the door at some point, around about 10:30.
No, 10:20. He said he will be here 10:20.
Yeah, but we had a fire alarm. But the trouble is, she might not have been here with a fire alarm. And I know you will all say, "Oh, what fire alarm?" All right. So as I do each week, it's the same with the civils. The structural notes are still there, and then we build up to a full set of structural notes. And by the way, I would download anything from the civils that you need. I'm going to make that not available at some point. Very shortly, so that you just jump straight to the structural section. So if you think you may need it in the future, or you may be repeating it, I definitely take the example answers, because that's going to help you pass in future years as well. Okay, structural. Well, basically, structural steel is anything, any building, any structure that's made partly or wholly by steel. There are some pretty good advantages in it, and you would have noticed yourself, if you go to the airport to pick up your cousin and you bring them here for a couple of weeks and then you take them back to the airport again 2 weeks later, you'll notice you go, where did that building come from? And, you know, for what was a concrete slab is now almost a warehouse completed, because it's been made out of steel. When you make things out of steel, you don't have to wait for the sun to dry it like you do the timber. It's a one-stop shop. It's not going to move very much at all once it's all bolted or welded together. It's quickly assembled. And cost-wise, it works out a little bit dearer. But when you're talking about a huge warehouse area, we're not really talking about a lot of money, really, when you compare it. If you're building a domestic house, I do notice they're starting to do quite a lot of building in steel these days, but timber is still the the recommended one in terms of the cheaper way to build. The secret to it is all about the availability of the steel in the country at the moment. Now, I actually personally came across issues myself recently within the last couple of years, but let's go back to my days of designing stuff at the likes of simply like Merck's or what have you, which is one of the consultancies that turned into Jacobs now. The first thing we would do would look up a chart like this, which was put out by New Zealand Steel, and it would tell us what members and lengths were available. So there's no use designing a building that was 13 metres long by 13 metres when the longest steel member that we could find was 12, right? I mean, that sort of thing didn't make sense. So we would go back to the boss and say, I know the client wants 13 by 13, but you've got to tell them that at 12 by 12 it'll be a lot cheaper. It's all wastage. To give you an idea on a house I built myself in 2015, I wanted a window facing north, and it was it needed steel around the window frame, and that was my $30,000 window. It's what extra it cost to put it in there. It was a big window, but it had the steel went from the top story down to the bottom story, and so yeah, that gives you an idea of what it costs to introduce a little bit of steel to domestic build. During COVID, they had some issues. They had a lot of shortage in this sort of thing, which I also came up against. And believe it or not, we were waiting for our beam to come from Christchurch, of all the places it had to be shipped up, which put a big hole on the building. They're trying to get around these things with wooden beams, but they're so huge, and they can't really be penetrated in any way. So the biggest problem is people with double garages on the basement of their house, because you're spanning quite a long way. You're spanning 6 by 6 metres, and that usually takes quite a large timber beam. Steel, not so bad. A fairly relatively small steel beam. The other thing with the bigger buildings, where everything's been made of steel, is how's it jointed? How are we joining them? And I've got quite a few questions in the test on this, but you'll also find this helpful with the assignment as well. There's bolting, there's welding, and there's what we call rivets, or rivets. Rivets start very small, and you can buy a little rivet gun, and basically you put this like small, like a bit of wire almost with a head on it, and you squash it up. So from the back gets squashed up, the front gets squashed up, and you end up with, I suppose, what you might call 2 buttons or bubbles on each side. Now that will work absolute wonders on anything that's not exposed to weather. Once it's exposed to weather, it becomes a weak point in the joint. The Auckland Harbour Bridge, which most of us have driven over from time to time, in my case probably 2 or 3 times a week these days, what they've done with that is they keep painting it. So they keep putting a layer of protection on it. So there's not one guy, but a team of people that go from one side of the bridge to the other. And it takes them a year to paint it, and then they go and paint it all the way back the other way again. So it's a continuous thing, and you'll find most of the big bridges around that have got rivets on it are continuously being painted to try and stop them from rusting, basically. Now you learn all about that in materials, and I'm not really interested in that as far as my drawing's going, but needless to say, probably in today's world you wouldn't put rivets in anything. The harbour bridge became very vulnerable. I think a truck crashed into one of those angled members a little while back, maybe a year ago, and the whole lane was out for ages while they were working out whether things were going to fall over, etc. Because the rivets all popped and it kind of twisted. Bolting's the most popular way of joining steel because you've got a selection of bolts you can use. You go along to a hardware shop like Placemakers, Bunnings, Mitre 10, you can buy an ordinary domestic bolt which usually holds up to a certain weight and is good enough for domestic purposes. But they go right up to engineering bolts, which are the very tough, black, strong bolts. And that's what we tend to use in engineering design when we're doing bolting. The advantages with bolts are that it's quick. If you've got a crane or you've got one of those things that shifts people up to high levels, you can put 2 or 3 members together really quickly. But the design has to be perfect, because when you're up high and you're trying to match bolt holes, you've got to get it dead right. Your wee mallet that you're banging them through with, you know. But these guys are pretty, well, see guys and girls that work on these things, mostly men, but they are pretty good at what they do, you know. And the crane driver and the dogman, they work as a team and they do these things really quickly. So you've got a good, strong, sturdy, engineering bolted joint. Welding in a factory is great. If you're welding like the what we've got, which is a column with a plate welded. Plate looks a bit like that. You've got your column sticking up. And it's welded to both ends. You can do that in a factory pretty quickly. The factory is good because there's no public around. You don't have to have that many safety measures. There's just you. You have your helmet, your protection on your head, and you know, as long as there's no one in the peripheral, you can go ahead and you can weld that fairly quickly, comfortably. Then it can be transported by truck to site and put on top of the concrete slab. What is a problem, and can be a problem, is welding on site, because you start getting into health and safety. You've got to put fences around. You don't want animals or people coming anywhere near that don't know anything about what to do, you know, and you've got to have all your equipment there, your gas bottles, and sometimes you might be welding at height, so you've got to have the different rules for welding at height, etc. So welding is good, in my opinion, if it's done in a factory. If it's some joints are on site, no, definitely I would try my best to do bolting in terms of joining them together. Okay. In terms of your drawing, if it's a weld, there is a symbol for on-site and there's a symbol for in the factory. There are symbols for, a lot of symbols for the types of weld joints. You're going to be doing a fillet weld. We'll go into that at the end of this lecture if I get a chance to, but there's definitely notes in there for it. In terms of any of the bolts, if it's not called up as an engineering bolt, call it up as an engineering bolt, a strong engineering bolt. Alright? It's a bit like me when I was making a deck recently and my builder said, oh, you don't want to pay for expensive stainless steel bolts. He says, just galvanised will do. they'll last 10 years before they start being a problem. And I said, well, I'm hoping to be in this house longer than 10 years. And it was on a deck that I'm standing on, you know, and you're sort of thinking, you know, maybe if you're selling a house, maybe that's a bit of a cheapskate thing to do, but I definitely would anywhere near ocean. And there's not many places in Auckland that are very far from the sea. The general rule is, as the bird flies, 1 kilometre. If you're within a kilometre of somewhere, and we are here, because it's tidal up that creek behind us, Oakley Creek I think it's called, it's tidal up to a certain point. Then you're supposed to use galvanised, which is a big clue because you will be doing this on the Unitech site. Okay, so what sort of members are there available to us in terms of beams and columns and everything? This is I suppose, the description of them here. So you have a universal beam that's previously used to be called a height by width by weight by metre. So, as an example, a 760 by 270 by 244 kg universal beam, UB. We now just simplify that, so the modern call-up is 760 UB 244. I want you, on your assignment, to only do modern call-ups. Alright? The reason why I've actually got the old call-ups there is because one person in this class wants half a month. Just waking everybody up for a second. I know the fire alarm has put you all to sleep. The reason why I've got old call-ups there is...
The reason modern you can't see the middle value, 271?
Well, in this case, yeah, the old call-up used to pretty much give you everything, didn't it? The 270 and the 760, but that's not why I put it there. I mean, it's good to compare, but I've given you these, and probably the only person that lectures in structural steel that does give the old call-ups to students. And it's not because I'm old and grey.
Because it's modern?
Beg your pardon?
Because it's modern to the new modern thing?
Well, I wanted to show you the way that the modern thing, that is, where it says now called up as, that's the modern way of doing it. Okay, I'll put you out of your misery. This half a mark floating way down the river. The reason for it is that a lot of structural work isn't brand new drawings and brand new buildings. Sometimes, often, we're asked to add on to buildings. Take this one here. All of those old call-ups would be on this building because it was built in the 60s, 70s I think. But designed in the 60s as a civil defence building. So I've seen the drawings for this, they're all very nice, neat, hand-drawn drawings, but they've all got the old call-up. So if you've got to marry into that to build your next piece on, no matter what it is, you need to know what the old call-up is because you're looking at it on the plans. It's a bit like the inches to feet thing that I had at the beginning with civils. You need to know some of the old numbers, or else you struggle. You know, if you're given a job where you're adding on. So these kind of don't mean much looking at them, but they mean a lot more when you see a picture of them. So here's a picture of 5 of those things. Normally I get you to try and guess which one's what, but I'll tell you here. That is a what we call, where's it gone? A rolled steel channel, the channel being a U shape. So it's this one here. Anyone tell me whether it's a TFC or a PFC?
P?
PSC.
PFC.
Who said the P? Just one person. Can you tell me what the P stands for? Is it J- hey?
Primary. Primary.
Primary, no. No, he's right, but can someone tell me what the P stands for?
Parallel. Parallel flange.
Parallel. Yes.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, I think you've probably done enough to earn that half mark. Not that I want another email from you, but never mind. I'll have to put up with one. Before 12 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's parallel. That means that there's two of them. You've got one that's parallel, so they look like that. So these sides are all parallel. And what you said, Lena, before about T, that's a tapered one. And so it will look more like that. Can you see that? Go on this side. Easiest way to remember, this is parallel and that's tapered.
Oh,
Alright?
that's good.
And I'm now everybody in the class has got that image. No one's going to get that question wrong on the test. And I'm not lifting my shirt for anyone in the test either. Okay, this here is a beam, but the column, I think I may have sketched this in the past. The difference between a beam and a column is normally a beam is very thin on the flange. So this part here is very thin, whereas a column also, sorry, I'll exaggerate it, the beam is usually quite a lot taller than it is wider, whereas a column is kind of similarly fat as it is wide as it is high. So it's a bit more kind of square looking, right? Believe it or not, that beam can take just as much weight that way as this one can. Where the column works better is where it's flipped and used as a column on a building. It's got more strength. It's got 1, 2, 3 sides that are fatter when it's turned that way. But when it's running that way, just because it's fatter doesn't mean to say it's stronger than necessarily than that beam. What the advantage it does have is that it's usually shorter, whereas that's normally deeper, and that could be a problem in a building where you want more height. You've also got your hollow sections as well, which is these ones here, which is your rolled, your hollow section, your right, your RHS, your rolled hollow section, and your circular hollow section. In addition to these, there's plates, and an angle is simply a bit like an L. Alright, but of course it continues on. So if I had two cell phones, it would be a bit like two cell phones joined together. And that angle is what you'll have to get your head around for the assignment. Now, there are ways of calling these up in terms of these numbers here, but they're more reserved for when you start doing things like structural design. When you do that, you'll be putting in numbers and coming up with an answer for B or D or T in your structural design. Okay, and that depends on how much weight's on and how much is on this end, and is it cantilevering or is it is it moving? Blah blah blah. Some of you will know exactly what I'm talking about, having done structures. Some of you are going, what the hell is he talking about? I don't know whether I want to do this structures or not. So you tend to branch into either structural steel or structural concrete. And with structural concrete, you work out what the reinforcing bars will be in the concrete. There we are, there's the angles. You have an equal angle, which would be more like that one, and you have the unequal angle. So here's an example of rivets, bolting. So it looks complicated, but if those holes are there and there's a plan of how it goes together, they get a couple of bolts in and they're away. They can put the rest of them in pretty quickly. Welding, of course, as we've talked about that. So normally, as an engineer, you'll get a, if you're an engineer from Auckland University, you'll get the whole job. You'll get told to design it, cost it, and get back to the client. You do a couple of pages of design, and there's a slightly different design for bolting as welding as using, depending on which you're using. And as a technician in a structural office, you may also be doing most of the work, but you just don't have are not allowed to sign it off. But you may be told, look, we've got a job here, want to design these steel members, go to New Zealand Steel, find out what's available, if there's availability, and then come back with a design and I'll have a look at it. So a structural engineer will look at it and they might say, no, that's perfect, or I'll make that a such and such. All right? We tend to over-design in New Zealand. I've said that with concrete, same with steel. The more the merrier normally. But of course, the client's pushing the other way. Oh no, can you take those steel members out? Blah, blah, blah. And then of course you've got the architect who's pushing the other way too, but for different reasons. The architect's saying, if you can save some money on the steel, I can make this beautiful entrance, that looks so pretty. It doesn't matter if it all falls down on everybody, at least it looks lovely, right? So they're pushing the other way. So this is all recorded. It's okay. I have a long history of winding up architects. The architects tend to try to get involved with everything, whereas they really should just stick to drawing the building as they want it to look like from the outside. I was doing some of the earthworks design for Sylvia Park before they built that, and an architect came along and boy, that turned what was going to be a relatively easy design at one end into quite a difficult one, and it was all to do with the shop frontage and what they wanted it to look like. I don't know if you've been to Sylvia Park, but that shop frontage is now a bloody pub. So the whole thing was a waste of time. But he wanted that to be his premium. It's a British pub, I think. He wanted that to be his premium retail shop. I digress slightly. So when you get a job like this, and your budget is important. There's a question on this in the test. But it's also important the availability of the members and making the thing work. As an engineer, sometimes you can come back with some quite clever ways around things within your budget. It's not necessarily what architects want. Then there's the bolting side of things. Now this is a little bit dated. Going to have to put the latest. I'll wait till the Olympics is over and I'll put a picture of the latest guy in. But really, the reason for Usain Bolt being in there is because he's got the same name as the Bolt. So one wonders who the next one is that's going to come along. One thing I like about that man is he never took drugs that we know of, whereas a lot of the others have been picked up recently of trying to beat him on drugs. The bolts range from curved bolts right through to bolts that go into concrete, like at the bottom there, and they tighten up within the concrete so you can't pull the steel member away from the concrete. The curved end bolts are used in areas where you don't want to catch your fingers or your hands or anything on it, or it might be seen by the public. So it's just a nice curved button. Whereas if you've got a jagged end of a bit where a screw might fit in, you can get issues with people hurting themselves on it, or just plain looking ugly. And we have the definition here is commercial, high strength and high strength bolts here. I want you to pick one for your assignment and put it into the assignment when you're doing the equations, okay? So don't just go, oh, there's 25 bolts and have number, length and size. You've also got to give a description of it, whether it's high strength or commercial. And there's further descriptions further down there as well. Now there are bolt positions within things, and I will be going into this in more detail before we do the test. But generally speaking, these things here are in the test, but they describe the location of the bolt. So if I go out a wee bit from that, the pitch is in a beam is the bolt running lengthways. The back gauge is the distance from on an angle like that. You've got a hole here. The back gauge is from that point to the hole. If you've got a hole here, the back gauge is from that point down to the hole. So that's what we call a back gauge. It's really just a dimension from the flat part of the other flat part of the angle to where the hole is. The edge distance is from the edge of the beam or the plate to the circle or the hole for the bolt, and we have what's called a minimum edge distance and a maximum edge distance. We also have a minimum centre to centre and a maximum centre to centre. And I will be testing you on that. Here's the angle and what I was talking about, the back mark. It's also a back mark from that point across to that hole as well. Now the reason why we have a minimum distance here between centres is we don't want this buckling to occur, and that buckling can occur on plates very easily, steel plates. And of course bursting and splitting is where we put the holes too close together or too close to the edge. And as you can see from that sketch, if you put it too close to the edge, it'll crack and split right to the edge. If you put the bolts too close together, they'll crack or split between the two bolts. And what's the mass behind it all? The mass behind that is 32 T. or a maximum of 300. T is the thickness of the steel. So if that's a plate, and that's 10 millimetres thick, 32 times T is 320. So the maximum length will be 320, but it does have a or 300 there, so we'd have to knock that back to 300. Alright? If it was 8 mil thick, it would be 256, which would mean 256 would be the maximum that would be between any two holes on the plate. Now when you do your hole, work out where your holes go on your plate, you're going to have to bear in mind those things there. Now remember, the plate goes onto the column. That has got nothing to do with the holes. The plate is a whole plate, the column is welded onto it. But you don't want the holes too close to the column. You can go inside the column, but it can't be too close to them because you've got to be able to tighten them up. Alright? So there, you've got to think logically your way through how the building's going to go together. The other one is, how close can we put them? How close can we put the holes? And the answer to that is 2.5 times the nominal diameter of the bolt. So if it's not the hole, it's the bolt. So a question I have for you is, I've got, hoping you answer this, because you're only allowed a maximum of half a mark on every assignment. So you become my friend for this one. You've got a bolt here, and it goes into a hole. The bolt's 16 millimetres. What's the diameter of the hole on a steel? You would like to have a guess? Actually, make it harder. On steel and on timber, they're different. Nobody's willing to give it a crack? So I want the...
40?
We have 16 here, 16 millimetre diameter, going into a hole on timber and a hole on steel. So what do you say?
40.
No.
You're asking the
Actually, that's... You're not doing that you're not doing the 2.5 thing.
Yeah.
Actually, that is actually correct. It's 2.5 times 16, but that's not what I was answering. So with timber, the hole is, if it's a 16 diameter bolt over here, with timber, that is also 16 diameter, okay? Because you just use a drill and then you bang the bolt through. Sometimes it's a bit tight, but it still goes through. With steel, you need a millimetre either side. Okay, so with steel, and I'll change that to steel, it becomes 18 millimetre diameter. So that the outside of the hole is 18 millimetres diameter for a 16 millimetre bolt. So if I said it was an 18 millimetre bolt hole, what would be the minimum would be between the two centres of the holes?
40.
Exactly, yeah. Because you take off 2, which makes a 16 millimetre bolt, and that's the nominal size of the bolt, and then you multiply it by 2.5. So with plate design, or hole design or bolt design, whatever you want to call it, there are two factors that come into play: the 2.5 factor and the 32T factor, with other small variances. So we'll go over that before the test, because there will be some plate design in the test. Remember, the idea is, just like reinforcing, you've got to push the holes towards the outside as best as you can around the outside of the plate. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes it has to come more towards the centre. There's some information there on high strength bolts and some ideas there for detailing up where the bolt holes are. If it's a bolt hole, it's usually done that way with the width of the bolt and a darker fill in there. So there it is, there's the section, that's what a section looks like if it's a hole. And that's what a plan looks like. If it's got a bolt actually in there, then it's got a double centre line there and a circle. Or it looks like that with a centre line. There's a whole lot of common terms there. Please read through those. One of the questions in the test is, would you use a splice joint for strengthening or lengthening? And the answer is, a splice joint is where you end up with steel spliced into another piece of steel and welded. There's nothing wrong with the strength of that, but you're not really making it any stronger. You're using that to make a longer piece of steel. Then we get into welding at the very end here, and unfortunately, because of the 10 minutes or so that the fire decided to rip through the building, we have a symbol here for a weld. You're going to have to put the symbol onto correctly onto your drawing, your elevational drawings, or your details. It's not a site weld, so the little golf flag is not there. Remember we said we're going to weld it in the factory? So it won't be on site. You've got to decide whether it's an all-round weld. If so, you put the little circle there. The arrow will be there, definitely pointing at the spot where the weld is. And it will have this V thing at the back. The question is this. So it's going to be that, oh, trouble coming. Is it going to be that? It isn't all round, by the way. Is it going to be that? Or is it going to be that? The V goes at the back with a 6. And you'll see as the welding notes go on that we talk about the fillet weld further down. I'll let you read through that yourself. The 6mm is the width either side of the weld, and the fillet weld is here somewhere. There it is there. So it's one of those three. Okay, if you get it right, obviously that's good. If you get it wrong, you've got one chance in 3 getting it right or wrong. Okay, and there's more fillet weld examples further on. There it is there, that shows you a fillet weld between two pieces of metal. looking down on the fillet weld, it looks a bit like my beard, okay? So, here's the column, here's the plate. Actually, it's probably more like a schoolboy's beard rather than mine. I got in trouble one year because I said it looked more like a certain nationality's beard. Got a complaint, so I won't say that this time around. We'll leave it as it is. We'll just say it's more like a schoolboy's one because everybody's a schoolboy at some stage. Apologies to the females. Could include you if you want to. But you'd probably rather not. Okay, so that's what it looks like on a plan view. And of course, looking down on that, you'll probably have a couple of holes there too, for the bolts, because I don't think you're going to be able to fit them in the corners with the parameters that we were talking about to the edge. Okay, so there are a couple of questions from that welding section in the test, so it's worthwhile reading through. And hello, just on time. No, you were here for the fire.